It's the last part of the afternoon, second last part actually to be precise. And the topic that we're speaking on is the entrepreneurial spirit, lessons from the CFO. Joining me on my panel this afternoon, I've got Ryan McDougall, who is the CFO of MyBucks, seated right next to where I'll be seated. And I've got Evan Tatarolikis, who is the FD of Taste Holdings. Please welcome my panelists with a round of applause. Thank you very much for joining me on Friday the 13th. Just your lucky day to be sitting on the stage with me. But thank you very much for engaging in our topic. Let me start with you, Evan. Just entrepreneurs. The entrepreneurial spirit. How do you normally, what is your angle when dealing with entrepreneurs?
Well, I think entrepreneurs are risk takers. They take the risks, they're visionaries, they can see the bigger picture. So I think, you have to keep up with them at the end of the day. They run at 100 miles an hour. You have to keep up with them and you have to say, okay, hold on a second, maybe that direction is not the right direction.
Okay.
Maybe go this direction.
Yeah.
And otherwise, keeping up with them is the biggest challenge. And I can give you, they're very hands-on.
Okay.
I can give you a story. I think when we started our food distribution business, it was the first time we started, we didn't even have trucks. So we rented trucks, and we started delivering to stores. Geez, we were making losses.
Oh dear.
Like any entrepreneur does. The CEO always tells me that when he started Scooter's Pizza, it took him 5 years to actually break even.
Really?
Yeah.
Sure.
But anyway, so just returning to the distribution, so we were making losses, so we wanted to find out why. Let's improve this. So we actually went to the depot and we got into the trucks, just like any hands-on entrepreneur would do. And started the first shop we stopped to deliver. We took out the invoice. It was a fish and chip store. So we said, he shouted, "Give me 4 cases of fish." No problem. I went, found it in the truck, gave it to him. And then give me 4 cases of rations. So I go back to the truck and. But hold on, there's foot-long rations, there's 5 kg rations, so obviously the reason why one of the biggest reasons why we went efficient and those making losses is because the guys that were in the trucks, could not differentiate the product.
Oh dear.
So that's just one of the lessons where, an entrepreneur would actually dig deep into the detail and go out there, find out, what's wrong, and obviously there's improvements thereon.
Thank you so much for that. Ryan, welcome. Thanks for joining us this afternoon as well. Can you just speak to the entrepreneurial spirit and tell us what's your interpretation of who entrepreneurs really are?
Sure. Well, maybe before I begin, I'll just give a little bit of the background as to why I think it's kind of relevant that you hear a little bit of my crazy story. Is that I'd been in banking for many years, so HSBC and Standard Bank Offshore Group. So for many, many years, I'd been in this very rigid and structured space. And then I decided at some stage to take a leap into this world where an entrepreneur ran the business. So a few days and weeks before I'd gone through the interview, people were talking about this crazy individual, very entrepreneurial man, running this huge business, multinational, multi-product. And the stories were things like entrepreneurs are so crazy, they just fire people if they wear the wrong clothes. Or I've heard that someone took a lift 1 floor and he didn't take the stairs. And when the CEO saw that, he said, "I don't want you, this kind of person here, like you could just leave." So I was actually shivering when I went to the interview and I thought, geez, how do I break away from this? You structured, you taught how to think in an organization that's like very big corporate and get into this new corporate where the way of thinking is very open-headed. Anyway, so the interview went a little bit like, "Hi Ryan, I've seen your CV, I like it. Tell me what star sign you are." So it's not one of those sort of 5 standard questions you prepare for. So I told him what it was and he said, And how do you work with this type of star sign? So I was like, honestly, I really don't know. Like, what is a Taurus like? So he said, no, it's like this and this. And I said, well, okay, I'm married and I've got 2 children. I think I should be able to handle difficult people. So he said, okay, cool, you're hired. And it struck me as like, it was one of my first experiences with him, and it struck me that was all his decision making going to be based on this kind of gut feel and not a lot of structure and rigidity. And it was definitely a huge, huge learning curve for me to understand that coming from a big banking environment, coming from the structures where some of the policies have been written 30 years ago, they're not even scanned into PDF. You have to dig them out of a cupboard.
A scroll.
On papyrus, maybe. And to go to this sort of organization where he's making decisions on gut feel, and he's making random calls, and he's pulling numbers out of the air, and there's just no structure or routine behind it. You have to realize as a CFO, that's a very difficult thing. It makes you kind of nervous. It gives you those cold shivers that you don't really want to feel at night. But you, as the CFO, have to build that layer underneath. It's almost like a subliminal layer of policies and procedures. You don't need the governance to be at the forefront, like you might have at a bank.
Okay.
You need it to be in the background. You need it to have like a very underlying layer, something that the CFO should know about but not be intimately aware of.
Oh.
But I think, you're right. I think but governance is essential, though. That's the thing, especially if you're in a highly regulated environment. So I think you're right. I think the trick is to balance governance with the entrepreneurial spirit. Like you said, they do make decisions off the cuff. One of the and to corporatize an entrepreneurial environment, I mean, it made delayed decisions. Previously decisions were made on the phone, whereas now, unfortunately, you've got to take it through this department, and that committee. So it's quite a hard and challenging balance to maintain.
I'm a very big fan of Clem Sunter, actually, and I hope that he's not a competing sponsor, but he talks about the fox and the hedgehog. And what I've found a lot with these entrepreneurs is they tend to fit into this, what Clem calls the fox, is that someone who understands the regulatory environment, he understands the perimeters and the boundaries to what he's operating in, and he learns how to make that work for him.
Okay.
Rather than traditional, what he calls a hedgehog, is people who will make a decision, realize that there's a boundary to that decision, then go back into their shell and try and make a different decision. So being very foxy about that, and that's one of my experiences both at Trustco and now specifically at MyBucks, is that deep understanding is something that people don't think entrepreneurs necessarily are very learned individuals or don't have a lot of degrees or things like that. But often you find that these people have a deep understanding of the industry, something far greater than those people who even operating within that industry.
Right.
And they know the boundaries and they push them. And that's where you've got to push back and be able to be rigid and firm,
Yeah.
but at the same time being agile and help with those decision making.
That's quite difficult even to sort of know what the rules are, and you want to play by the rules, but also to have that flexibility. Can you speak towards a situation perhaps that you encountered where you knew what was the right thing to do, but you had to stick to your guns?
It's pretty difficult, and sometimes it's as easy as this is illegal.
Okay.
But other times it's hard, but as long as you know the facts, and you can actually prove that this is going to happen, any entrepreneur would actually stop asking you, well, is there another way around it? Can you find a loophole? No, so what I say is you've got to stick to your guns, because it's your reputation on the line as well, and as well as the companies and the entrepreneurs.
So, Ryan, in dealing with entrepreneurs, I think when we started the conversation, we said they're risk takers. And I think because they see the picture of the business or this baby that they've given birth to, and they want it to grow. Do you think entrepreneurs are also open to guidance?
Oh, yeah, I found that entrepreneurs tend to be less worried about the opinion that people have of them and more open to growing people underneath them, being a part of a mentoring goal and guiding people and teaching them. I think that they have that self-confidence within them to say that it doesn't matter what I teach this person below me or at the same level as me, because they will never be able to overpower me or worry about a hierarchical structure, because this is really my space. This is where I operate. This is what I want to do. I want to be dynamic, and I also want to have the best people around me. And so I've found, like, interestingly enough, that entrepreneurs are very, very open to the whole learning process, and also
awesome.
self-learning too, which is interesting. You know, both the two previous CEOs that I've worked for have been voracious readers. They read all sorts of interesting books about, for the current guy, does a lot of reading about fintech and things like that. And the previous manager read a lot of books about the art of war and things like that. So not necessarily always the best books to read, but definitely open to learning and open to teaching as well.
Okay. And Evan, on your side?
Yeah, look, all I know is that they hire. One of the lessons that I've learned is they hire people sometimes that are smarter than them. You know, not that I'm smarter than them.
But isn't that a
definitely
smart
not?
move?
Yes, but that's what I've learned, and from the CEO that I work for, he says, the best thing you can do is hire people that are smarter than you, hire people that are better at the things that you're bad in, put it that way.
Yeah. And also, I think not everybody can be a jack of all trades. So it's also about knowing your skill set and what you can't do to leverage off of those that have a better skill set in different avenues of business. And let's just speak on emotional intelligence. You know, I think dealing with certain type of characters, like in the corporate world, it's so structured and there's etiquette and rapport. When dealing with entrepreneurs, it's not quite like that. They're much more free-spirited. Can you speak to that talking point?
Yeah, I definitely think that's, again, my experience was that coming from a corporate, you'd expect that the exco meetings and that the board meetings would happen in a boardroom, and that people would rock up in jacket and tie, and they'd sit around in front of neatly laid out folders, and we'd go through the list one by one. We've had board meetings in the CEO's lounge.
Home lounge.
Yes.
Oh.
We've had exco meetings on a game farm, and these sorts of. So initially, I was thinking it's very interesting that we disrupting the way of thinking, but is it actually doing anything different? And one of the things that we do often at these excos and these board meetings is gamification. So you might start off the meeting rather than saying, well, who's read the minutes? Put up your hand. Who has any addendum to add, who has any things to add to point number 5. Sure, we'll often start meetings by having like a game.
Oh, really?
So you might decide, okay, everyone has a tiny piece of paper in front of them, and please write down what is your favorite color, or if you were to rate yourself as 1 to 5 in terms of superhero power, or something like that.
Really?
So then everyone might do something, the papers would go back into the center, and then someone would pick out a name and say, okay, let me read about Ryan, he wants to be the invisible man, or something like that. Let's talk a little bit about that. Is it because it's results time? But it gets like the conversation going, and what the interesting thing about that is that only after a period of time did I realize it was in order to stimulate the creativity. Because you don't necessarily want to bring together your 10 or 15 smartest people in a room, in a boardroom, and then have them into a very structured approach where they're not in a situation where they can strategize and think in a gray space. You've got to get those creative juices flowing, and often the best way of doing that is having a good icebreaker, having something that breaks you away from that document that's lying in front of you and waiting to look at. Because when you do start delving into that document, you do start seeing things that might not necessarily have seen before. And also hopping around, why do we have to start with the agenda in the minutes? Sometimes we'd start with the most burning topic that everyone wanted to ask about, and it might take 5 hours, and then we run through the rest. But that gamification of the business meetings is something that I think entrepreneurs do very well, because they're not necessarily trained in that way that corporates have been trained, and it's breaking that mindset is so critical.
Should we? So just on that point, entrepreneurs, is that mine?
Yes.
They always have the personal touch. For example, there's great interaction with every single individual in the company. It's not like in a bank with respect to the bankers, and the bosses just go up to their office and just say good morning and just disappear. No, I mean, our CEO, he goes and has coffee with anyone. He goes around the offices, says hello. There's the personal touch there, and that creates a great culture for the company and a great family culture for the company. Everybody feels like they're connected in some way, and that's always beneficial for the company. You know, there's happy people, and I mean, people supersede operational performance, which obviously supersedes financial performance.
So, Evan, I know the entire audience wants to know what your superpower is.
I know what you're thinking. I can read your thoughts.
I think the point that you're both making is that if you choose alternative methods, you then, as a leader, become approachable. I think what you're saying is your leaders have opened their homes to you, and that's a different style, because in corporate, everybody has their corporate life, and then after 5 or at whatever time it is, everybody knocks off, and then they have this other family life. But I think with the entrepreneurs, you guys have really seen real people. Can you speak towards how, for instance, a very rigid person who does the morning and goes into his office, and if you want to see him, you need to consult his PA, and somebody who's approachable at any time, how does that make you more productive, and how does that make you grow in your career?
Can I?
Yeah, sure, go. Superpowers.
I think, look, sometimes it's great to have an open door policy, and I mean, the CEO leads with example, by example. So even in our teams, in my team, I do the same thing.
Okay.
You know, I'm open. Sometimes you really, it's not the right time for someone to just walk into your office, but you know, you have to accept it. And you know, he's created a family. You know,
Okay.
it's when there's expos, you know, we go to, we not only go ourselves, we bring our families, you know, to the house, you know, to his house. So, you know, and that's something that I've never seen before. I mean, we hired some executives over the past 2 years with the two brands that we got, and these are power executives coming from Massmart and other places like that. And they came into our company, and you know, Carlo invited them to his house. Okay, just a family day, the executive committee. So the one exec comes and says, "Wow, we have never experienced this before.
Yeah.
You know, this is awesome. What a great place to work." So that's ultimately that's what the guys create.
It's interesting, actually, because it's not for everyone. I know that it sounds like amazing, whatever, but certain people who they can't adapt to that working environment. They need the structure, and they need the routine, and they respect that. And fine, the previous CEO used to always say, well, that's because they've been trained to think that way. And he was very sort of anti-establishment in terms of thinking that banks train people to think in a certain way, but it's not true at all. I mean, there's very entrepreneurial people in all organizations, and I think what's important to note is that it doesn't necessarily mean that you, in order to be an entrepreneurial finance person, you need to break into an entrepreneurial organization. You can take lessons away from an entrepreneurial environment and implement them in a corporate environment. And I think it will benefit everyone. I think there needs to be an element of cross-learning, both between entrepreneurs and corporates and vice versa. Definitely this kind of like having an open mind towards strategy and towards thinking about solutions and products is very, very critical. And it's something that we should all look towards. But certainly going back to my point was that we had people who came in and after like a week, they were like, this place is just too nuts. I need my corner office back.
And do you find that people leave and never come back, or some people have taken, perhaps in your teams, time to integrate and have been vocal about the difficulties of changing their mindset, and how have you helped them?
Well, I think first thing is, you know, when we were building our team, the first thing we looked at is, would the person fit in with our culture?
Okay.
At the end of the day. Because it's not fair for us, and it's not fair for them if they come in and then want to leave after three months.
Yeah.
So I suppose that's what we do to limit that from happening.
And yesterday in one of our talks, we were speaking about building power teams. And a gentleman from Sasfin said to us that when they recruit, they actually get people who will be potential teammates or members to be in the interview process. Not to speak on the confidential information or so, but just to have a chat with the prospective candidate to say, do you think you'd be able to manage the situations that I've experienced in the past few months? And have you seen anything like that being done from a recruitment perspective?
Well, from our perspective, so we've, in both organizations actually, that we use a lot of what are the parametric type testing to determine personality types.
Oh.
And then using that personality type, you can actually establish like a trend. You can say, well, 20% of people who do these personality tests, they come out with a certain personality type, and there's all different sort of tests. The one we used at Trusco was a color grading, and the one we use now is more of a like a Myers-Briggs type indicator approach. But you can definitely see that there's certain people who fall into a certain category, they just won't cut it, unfortunately. But really, the true test is like Evan said, is the culture. You as the interviewer, and maybe you include people from your human resources department or from the team member, or sometimes we'd include people from other departments, just to kind of get a feel for that culture, whether or not they're going to fit into the culture, and ask them kind of pertinent questions.
Yeah.
One of the things that my former CEO used to always ask is, well, how much do you drink? So I think most people would try to avoid the question, but he was trying to see, well, if you drink a lot, I think you'd do well.
Okay, so I'm just going to get our audience into this and make our conversation quite interactive. Just from a show of hands, how many of the people in the audience today work for an entrepreneurial type manager? Okay, so that's quite a bit. And just to open up to questions, perhaps you have some questions for Ryan and Evan, or even commentary, just to add towards what we've been speaking about. If you'd be so kind as to just give me your name, where you're from, and shoot with your comment or question. Thank you so much.
Hi, my name is George. I'm from Lockstep. Thank you very much. I'm interested to know the job that you would always probably have to fulfill as an FD or CFO is to provide the necessary capital for growth. And in an entrepreneurial environment where the outcomes are less forecastable, how do you navigate those decision-making points while still upholding your sense of confidence and responsibility as being the CFO?
So that's a good question. I mean, we've gone on capital raising roadshows quite a couple of times over the last couple of years, and you ultimately you just have to if you believe in what you're trying to raise money for, the words just come out of your mouth properly. I know that. It's all about an Excel spreadsheet at the end of the day, forecasts. And I mean, I've never seen a forecast that makes losses, at the end of the day, an Excel spreadsheet that makes losses. So but ultimately, it's, if you've got to believe in what you're ultimately selling at the end of the day. I recall a story, we always think big. Okay, we had when before we even got listed, we had Deloitte as our auditors, and we had an audit committee, because we thought big, and that's always how we planned our future. Look, I think Deloitte's became too expensive for us, and we sort of moved to a smaller firm. But I recall a story where we were going to Investec in Cape Town to raise some capital, and we were going there with our hat in our hand ultimately, but trying to sell a story, and we landed, we went and fetched our car, and it was a Merc. So we thought, gee, we don't, what's going on here? We're going to ask for money, and we're going to drive there with a Merc. which has never been the case. And, we actually, because we were so humble, we actually parked the Merc around the block and walked, because we were embarrassed, and walked to ask for the money, because, it's just the way we were, we were still confident enough, and we believed in the product, and we did get the money, by the way. I hope I've answered your question.
Thank you so much for that. Is there another question? Okay, in the front. Just coming to you. Remember to say your name, the institution you're from, and then your question, please. Please stand for me, dear.
Hi, everyone. My name is Nandos. I'm from Maneda Associates. It's an accounting firm, an emerging one. I would like to know, when you started up, how did you deal with the staff retention? Because I'm currently having a problem with that, cannot compete with other accounting firms, how I pay my accountants. So how did you make sure that you retain the quality, the accountants that are trained by you, avoiding to train people, and then they leave as soon as they have the experience they want? How did you manage that when you set it up?
I've got a quote for you. It goes a little bit like this. A CEO and a CFO were talking, and the CFO said, what if I train all my people so well and they leave? And the CEO said, what if you don't train them and they stay? So my attitude towards staff is to instill the same values that the CEO tries to create across the whole company within my team. So I try and create that family atmosphere in the team too. So we've got little things that we do in the team that I've kind of borrowed and stolen from some of the CEOs over time. Things like functions amongst your finance team. Just, it might be a thing that every Friday morning you just go out and get a coffee and a donut, or at the current place we do Friday lunches. Someone in the team on a Wednesday has to choose the restaurant. Thursday night we send out the menu. Friday morning everyone then chooses what meal they want to have on the Friday, and then we go off somewhere and we have lunch, or if it's very busy we'll eat at our desk, but we'll share like a kind of experience. So that's the first thing. And the second thing that I'm very, very strong on making sure that the people get trained. So if I can't do internal mentorship and I don't have the right people training other people, then I try and break out and find courses. And you'll be surprised at how many courses you can find out there that aren't necessarily that expensive. There's a lot of online things, and there's things that you can send one of your key guys away, and they can, go on a course for a day, and they can come back and they can train people. So making staff feel like they're part of something bigger, for me, has always been the real key.
And Evan, do you want to contribute to that, or should I take the next question?
I think just from my experience, what Ryan said about making staff feel, what we call them is, can you hear me? Hello? What we do is we call them all partners. So everybody is a partner at Taste. And I think what's important is they must be able to see what you see. So you must be able to communicate to them the strategy of the company, so that they know what your goal is, because your goal is their goal. And from my experience, I think if you communicate that well to your partners, the working environment improves, and hopefully the retention.
There's a question over here. I think it's my mic, sorry.
Oh, thank you. Good afternoon. My name is Vusin Kabini. I'm from Prasa. I'm a governance and compliance manager, so I'll ask you a question that's close to the heart. It's gradually becoming clear that CFOs are now becoming custodians of corporate governance and ethics, or being forced to be. Now, in your roles, how do you curb the usually over-exuberant, maybe entrepreneurial spirit that is so over-jubilant that sometimes there's non-compliance with legislation, with governance issues and ethics? Have you possibly experienced that, and how did you deal with it? Thank you.
Look, I think there's a lot of regulation out there, and I'm sure that not all companies are compliant to a lot of the regulations. I mean, you can't be perfect. And I think sometimes, though, it's very frustrating because it actually, it limits what you want to do. So, but you have to be compliant. I think a good company is a compliant company. So we try to be compliant as much as we can. So ultimately, it's all about the service providers that you can hire to try and help you with the compliance. But because you as the CFO don't know every single law, you know a lot, but you don't know every single law. So I mean, that's what we do. I think you probably feel the same way. I mean, there's certain must-dos, and there's certain okay, we will do it as soon as we get to it.
And there's an element of testing the boundaries, especially with entrepreneurs, is that I recall one instance where it was capitalization of an intangible asset.
Yeah.
And I was saying to the CEO, this is how it must go. And he was saying, but why can't we do that? Why can't we do it like this? So I said, well, that's how it is in the IFRS. You just can't do it. But he said, but what about this? And what about this? And actually we had the auditors across the table from us. And they were kind of like looking at me and sort of like saying, oh, this guy. and eventually like the CEO got more and more irate. And then eventually he picked up, because we had two IFRS books.
He fired the auditors.
No, he picked them up and he said, take your flipping books, and he threw it at them. Wow. And then they said, oh, these are your books. So there's definitely an element of that testing of the boundaries and whatever. And my experience was that you must establish those boundaries early on, and you must communicate those boundaries. It mustn't be a surprise. The whole idea is that CEOs, especially entrepreneurial CEOs, do not like big surprises. They do not like to be 90% of the way through the deal, and then some kippie says, but you haven't remembered about this piece of legislation that will effectively change the whole deal. So they need to constantly have that. And they're not thinking that way, so someone has to think that way. And you're right, more and more the CFO fulfills that role.
And I think sometimes, like you said, you're trying to do a deal, and the accounting treatment makes it not
viable.
Not viable, put it that way. But it's a great deal. So sometimes you have to strike the balance and say, well, you know what, I know this is a great deal. It's good for the business. So let me not let some, and we CFOs, we have to comply with IFRS, and let me not let some stupid accounting treatment limit what is really beneficial for shareholders. So yes, you have to strike the balance sometimes.
And be firm. If you gentlemen will let me take one last question, and then we'll wrap up. Thanks.
Hi, my name is Vivian from a business called Cash Connect. It sounds like both of the businesses have gone through growth phases. So you obviously have an entrepreneurial start, and then you end up in a position where it is a larger scale business. What have been some of your challenges or bits of advice around people? Because we've heard about bringing people in to supplement a team from a corporate environment, but there's also the people that grew with you. And do they shift the gear with you? What have been your challenges? How do you handle that?
It's sometimes quite disappointing to see people who've been part of a business that you've either acquired or you've grown with not growing at the rate of the rest of the organization. Because you do feel, especially in most of these entrepreneurial environments, that the family vibe, the family continues to work together. But some people definitely do get left behind, especially when it's a high-paced and rigid environment. And I think that it just talks to management and mentorship to understand that most people who are willing to learn and open to learn whatever will figure out a way to grow with the business. And does that mean more resources? Does it mean less resources? Does it mean that you need to put them on a different training course? Or does it mean that you need to redeploy that person. And then sometimes, unfortunately, there are certain times where people just don't keep up with the business and they do have to go. You know, it's a very sad thing to say, but not all horses are set for the same course. It's one of those things that most good entrepreneurs do have that EQ to be able to suss out quite early if someone's going to be able to keep up the pace with. And especially when you acquire an organization, and sometimes this does happen, and we did 5 or 6 acquisitions in my time as well, where there were people who were very in a very fixed and rigid mindset, and some of them changed and some of them didn't. It's just part of the journey that has to happen.
Okay, so thank you very much for contributing, dear audience, to those questions. Gents, any closing remarks about thinking out of the box?
I've also got a quote that, so we always say, people performance is first, okay? That supersedes the operational performance, and that supersedes the financial performance. So ultimately, I mean, like you said, people, it's all about the people. And that's what entrepreneurs, according to me, that's, you know, by creating a family environment, it's all about the people, and that's why they're successful.
And Ryan?
I think just as a parting shot, those of you looking to get into an entrepreneurial environment and thinking about breaking free or even thinking about starting your own business, being part of the financial community means that you've learned an extreme amount in terms of structure and financial knowledge and maybe even compliance and governance and things. But you must always open yourself to learning about business and about strategy. And there's certain things in business, and especially when you deal with really open-minded entrepreneurial types, that you can't read in any textbook. So you need to open yourself up to that experience and be ready for it, I guess.
Thank you so much for joining me in this talk this afternoon. Ladies and gentlemen, please give my panelists a round of applause.